Confronted my girlfriend for misleading me about crafting homemade chocolates, she left to stay with her sister, questioning my reaction. A couple of days ago, my girlfriend and I were celebrating, and she surprised me with chocolates she said she made as a gift. She was genuinely excited, telling me she'd spend hours on them. I know she works a waitress job and doesn't have much money, so I wasn't bothered by the idea that her gift didn't cost much compared to what I got her. It was the gesture that mattered. I even thought it was really sweet that she took the time to do something creative for me. I had no idea she could even make sweets, since she's always telling me she can barely cook. Curious, I asked how she learned to make them, and that's when she admitted she just melted pre-made chocolate and poured it into molds. She didn't make any of the fillings herself either. She used store-bought caramel and fruit spread. Literally all of it was pre-made. I couldn't help but feel irritated. From my perspective, it seemed like she barely put in any effort at all, yet she was acting ridiculously proud of herself. Usually, I let these little things go because she's so sensitive to criticism, but this time it got under my skin. I felt like she'd tricked me, so I called her out on lying about making the chocolates. She got upset, insisting she did make them because she put in so much effort. In the middle of arguing with me about whether it's okay to fudge the truth, she suddenly started texting someone, saying she didn't want to keep arguing. Before I knew it, her sister showed up to pick her up, and for the past 2 days, she's been staying with her instead of me. Her sister even called me a D on the way out, which just made me think my girlfriend must have lied to her sister too about making the chocolates. Otherwise, I can't figure out why she'd be so pissed at me. At first, I was completely convinced I was right, but now I'm starting to wonder if I was too harsh. I mean, deep down, I've always known cooking isn't really her thing, so maybe I was expecting too much. She's usually really sweet to me, always texting me, but she's barely spoken to me since that night. The silence is starting to get to me, and I'm questioning whether I overreacted. A few people said that age and what I got her might matter, so for context, I'm 32 and I got her some old figurine she collects. Also, to be clear, even though some people seem to think she put a lot of effort into the chocolates, from her own explanation it really didn't sound like it. She just used the microwave to melt the chocolate. She doesn't even own a kitchen thermometer, poured it into molds, and filled them with stuff she bought at the store. That doesn't sound like the kind of labor-intensive homemade chocolates people are imagining. I keep hearing about thermometers and difficult techniques, but honestly, it sounded like she just microwaved chocolate, filled the molds, and that was it. People keep telling me to try making them myself to see how hard it is, and I might actually do that because what others describe sounds pretty tough, nothing like what she did with the microwave. Part of me still feels like she took credit for something she didn't really do, but maybe I lost sight of the point that she put in whatever effort she could, even if it didn't fit my expectations. Now, sitting here missing her texts, I can't help but wonder if I should have just appreciated her gift for what it was. At first, I was kind of relieved. People started complimenting the chocolates, making me consider that maybe I really did owe her a proper apology for assuming she put no effort in. Then someone else linked the photo elsewhere, and suddenly I started getting a flood of insults and petty remarks from people just itching for a fight. The comments were brutal, lots of people saying it was obvious she didn't put in any effort, that the chocolates looked awful, all sorts of things, but it all felt too tainted to trust their opinions. With all that noise, I realized I couldn't actually get a real answer about whether or not the chocolates were any good, so I just decided not to mention any of that back to her. No point in stirring up confusion when the truth is just lost in noise. I texted her and asked if we could talk, and thankfully, she agreed. With how intense some people were about it, I started to get a little nervous, so I went all out with my apology. I took her out to this little arts and crafts place she loves, bought her some food, and just gave her the most heartfelt apology I could manage. She ended up apologizing as well, especially for running out to her sister's place when everything happened. Turns out, she's planning on taking a break from her sister, because apparently, her sister said some pretty awful things about me, stuff that really hurt her feelings. Her sister just assumed my girl would laugh along and went on to make all these bigoted comments, like full soapbox anti-us rhetoric. She actually called me a slur and said stuff like "this is why you shouldn't be a lesbian," all so she could dig into us about our lifestyle. I always had a weird feeling about her sister, and now I know why she never seemed to like me. Whatever the case, I'm just glad everything's settled and she came back home to me. I honestly can't believe some people really wanted to see all our years together thrown away over something as small as whether or not chocolates were homemade. Sure, she's got a history with lying. I've mentioned before how she lost her old job for lying about her work and taking random days off, and there was even a time when she'd pretend to get ready for work in the morning when she wasn't going at all. I had to pick up all the bills and manage everything else because of that, and that's part of why she isn't working a better job right now. People tend to accuse me of holding on to resentment, but in my eyes, I'm just being honest about where my trust level's at. I'm still learning things about what happened during those days she was pretending, and yeah, I admit I jumped to conclusions about the chocolates this time. But I owned up to it. I apologized for accusing her of lying on purpose, and she accepted it. What else is there to do? I'm not sure why so many people think I'm not taking responsibility. I know where my mistakes were, and I fixed them as best I could. And as for those who sent me nasty messages or tried to make something gross out of the innocent flour and star mold she used, get your minds out of the gutter. She's not some pervert, and it's honestly just bizarre that anyone would look at simple chocolate molds and think otherwise. Maybe it's time some people got a hobby, or better yet, a job. Update 2. I thought the whole thing would just fade into a funny, slightly embarrassing story we'd tell later, and then 2 nights after she moved back in, someone started knocking on our door at 1:30 a.m. I say knocking, but it sounded more like tentative nudges, like whoever it was trying to be polite about panic. It was her niece. Little backpack, sheep rolling suitcase with one wheel not working, hair pulled into a wonky ponytail with a scrunchie that was half slid off. She looked up at me and asked if Annie is awake, like she'd practiced that one line the whole way over. Turned out her mom had put her in a rideshare with our address and shut her phone off. My girlfriend went from dead asleep to entirely awake in a second. She got her inside, wrapped her in the same throw blanket we keep fighting over, and tried calling her sister about 20 times. No answer. When she finally got a call back, it wasn't from her sister's number, it was a recorded voice. Her sister had been arrested for DUI with property damage. No one hurt, thank God, but the car was a mess and so was everything else. I could hear my girlfriend's breathing change while she was listening to the options. Press 1 to accept the call, and when her sister finally got on, the first thing out of her mouth was another slur and some completely unhinged rant about how we were trying to steal her child. My girlfriend hung up. Then she cried the kind of cry where you're trying to be quiet because there's a kid in the next room who's been living in noise for a long time. I'd never seen her move like that before. She made hot chocolate in a pot because the microwave was too loud, laid out one of my shirts for the kid to sleep in because all her pajamas smelled like fryer oil from work, and pulled the sofa bed out with her knee like she'd done this 1,000 times. And when I started saying we needed to call someone official first thing in the morning, she said, "We can't do that," and I'm still feeding her breakfast, in this voice that didn't have any room for my logistics. So I shut up and found clean sheets. Morning was a mess in that very ordinary way that makes you realize what people carry every day without saying anything. We tried to get her niece to school on time with no lunch and no permission slips and a backpack full of random papers and a sweatshirt that wasn't hers. The front desk lady had that office voice that's both kind and clearly used a disaster. We left our information, and before we even got in the car, Child Services had called us back because the police report had already hit their system. The caseworker sounded like she'd been awake for 3 years. She started asking questions I'd never thought I'd answer about where the child would sleep, if there were any firearms in the home, whether anyone drank daily, if we could keep her for just a few days. My girlfriend said yes, and somehow it felt like she was answering all of it at once. We cleaned the spare room that's never really been a spare room, more like the place old boxes go to retire, and put the figurines I got her on the highest shelf because little hands are honest about gravity. We went down to Target so fast I left my wallet on the kitchen counter and had to Apple Pay everything like a teenager. The kid picked out socks with tiny strawberries on them, then looked really guilty and asked if that was too expensive. My girlfriend told her she could have 10 packs if she wanted. She moved her away from the toy aisle without making it feel like we were saying no to joy. I watched all of it and felt something in me go quiet that hadn't been quiet in a long time. At some point that afternoon, the kid saw our sink and asked why there were little brown smears on the side of the counter. We explained what had happened the other day in the most toddler version of reality we could manage, and she lit up and said, "We made those. Annie let me do the sprinkles if I didn't get them in the cat bowl." Apparently, the hours my girlfriend said she spent weren't all in one go. She'd been practicing with her niece on her days off so she could do something nice for me without spending much, because her sister was always asking to borrow money and then forgetting to pay her back. They'd bought the molds together at the arts and crafts place when the kid got a gold star at school. We'd been 2 doors away the night I apologized, same shop, same cashier, and I just hadn't noticed. It didn't feel like a gotcha moment. It felt like holding a new version of the same thing and realizing the edges are softer than you'd decided they were. The caseworker came by in the evening. She had the kind of tired that lives in people's eyes. She looked around, took notes on a clipboard, and told us we could file for temporary kinship care if we wanted stability for more than a couple of days. I asked if that meant lawyers, and the caseworker laughed like that word was a little joke we all tell ourselves. It does mean lawyers. It also means toothpaste that isn't the spicy kind and setting alarms for school and a calendar full of things that have nothing to do with date nights or lazy Saturdays. My girlfriend said yes again. She didn't even look at me first, and I didn't want her to. I just told the caseworker I'd get time off work and asked what to do about aftercare. That night, we made new chocolates. Not because I suddenly decided to become someone I'm not, but because the kid wanted to show me the star ones and how to bang the tray on the counter to get the bubbles out. We used a borrowed thermometer from our neighbor, who does BBQ and swears that temperature is religion. The apartment smelled like sugar and heat and dish soap, and somehow, for a couple of hours, it felt like we weren't waiting on a court date or another phone call that would make the floor tilt. Her sister tried calling again from a different number. My girlfriend looked at the screen a long time and then put the phone face down. She told me in this flat voice that all those mornings I've told myself she was just pretending to go to work, she was actually taking her niece to daycare when her sister stayed home, or calling in late because she had to show up at school for meetings her sister didn't go to. She didn't say it to fix anything. She just said it. I asked why she never told me, and she said she didn't think I'd want to share our life with a chaos she couldn't control, and if she told me, then she'd have to either keep doing it with my permission or stop. Neither felt good. I'm not going to pretend that didn't hit like a confession and an accusation in the same breath. It did. But I also watched her froth the litter out of a 6-year-old's hair that night and label a toothbrush cup with a dry erase marker because we don't have a label maker, and I'm not sure my neat answers were ever going to live here anyway. We made a list on the back of an electric bill of what we needed to do next: call a lawyer, talk to HR, get a car seat that isn't half broken, ask the neighbor if her teenage son wants to make $20 building IKEA furniture. The kid fell asleep with chocolate on her face and that strawberry sock foot poking out from under the blanket. We sat on the floor of the hallway, because the living room felt too big for the conversation, and my girlfriend asked me if I was mad that our life just changed in a night. I told her I was tired and that I wanted her to stop making decisions alone, and that if we were going to be the people who show up, then we were going to do it together. It wasn't poetic. It was a deal you shake on with your eyes open. Update 3. The emergency hearing happened on a Tuesday morning when the laundry was half switched and the cat decided the one white shirt I own was the perfect place to cough up whatever his body didn't need anymore. We were sitting at our wobbly kitchen table with a borrowed ring light because apparently your life can hinge on whether a judge can see your eyes, and the Zoom link kept making the kind of noise that sounds like you're dialing the internet from 1998. The judge's face was a grainy rectangle and his voice had the calm that makes you want to confess to things you didn't do just to get it over with. Our caseworker was there looking like a day folded into a person. My girlfriend squeezed my knee under the table and I realized my leg had been bouncing so hard we were basically drumming on the linoleum. Her sister called in from the jail line and got 2 words into another slur before the judge hit mute and said something about decorum the way you say no running by the pool. I had to say my full name and spell it. My girlfriend had to swear, palm up, that we could give a child a bed and breakfast and a schedule. The judge asked if we understood no unsupervised contact with the mother, and the way he said mother made me think about how words can be both a map and a maze. He granted emergency placement to us for 2 weeks pending a home study, which is a sentence that sounds small until you put a 6-year-old's toothbrush in your bathroom and feel your life rearrange around it. When the meeting ended, the sink dripped like nothing had happened. We went straight to the school with IDs in hand and that dryer lint taste in our mouths you get when you haven't had enough water or truth. The front desk lady pulled out a binder full of tabs and asked if we wanted to set a password for pickup. My girlfriend said strawberry socks before I even opened my mouth. The lady wrote it down like it wasn't the most absurd and perfect code in the world. Then she looked at us with that classroom and a smile expression teachers do and said she'd flag the account no one picks up without the code and a note from us. It felt like putting a little lock on a door that had been swinging in the wind for years. That afternoon a man knocked on our door holding a stuffed rabbit that had one ear chewed down to a matted little flag. He was skinny in a way that made his jacket look like a costume and he kept his distance on the doormat like he'd spent the last 3 years being helpful from exactly 6 feet away. He was a rideshare driver who'd brought the kid over in the middle of the night. He'd found the rabbit under his passenger seat, and then, in this careful voice, he said he had a dashcam and that if we needed a copy for a core, he could give it to us. You could tell he had this conversation with himself the whole drive over what's kind, what's interference, what's safety. He handed me a tiny thumb drive and a plastic sandwich bag in his card, which turned out to be the back of a takeout menu with his first name and number in block letters. I put the rabbit straight in the washing machine with the lie we tell ourselves that cold water saves everything. When we watched the clip later at the lawyer's office, it was everything I didn't want to see and exactly what we needed. The kid in the driveway with a little rolling suitcase, the way her sister did that fast ushering motion you do with luggage and not people, how the car door closed and she was already walking away before the driver even checked the app. Our lawyer didn't flinch. She paused the video on the kid's face and said, "Okay," like a person putting a thumb on a map to mark where you are. I used a credit card I swore I was going to pay off last year and signed a retainer contract that had fewer words than the weight in my stomach would have predicted. The receptionist gave the kid a lollipop and then 2 more when she asked if they had a different flavor that wasn't purple because purple tastes like fake. The lawyer looked at us like we were people who could do hard things, and I didn't argue with her. She put in the request for supervised visitation at the community center that smells like old gym floors and bingo nights. She told us to keep answering our phones, to answer all questions simply, and to please not get into it with the sister, especially not in any parking lot of any place that has security cameras and low-paid guards who don't deserve Wednesday like that. It still happened at school. The next day, which was Pizza Friday even though it was actually Thursday because the vendor had a conflict, elementary school time is different math. We were at the gate early with quarters and a baggie for the book fair because no one tells you that literacy has its own economy. The office called my girlfriend inside and I watched her face go still, and that way you learn when you're trying not to move too much around a skittish animal. Her sister was at the counter insisting she was there for a normal pickup and that she knew the password. She didn't. She said strawberry shoes and then berry socks and then something else that made the front desk lady's smile turn into that smooth blank that is basically a shield. The kid saw her through the glass and did that little hop children do when they're not sure whether to be happy or to hide. The secretary buzzed the door, but didn't open it. We could all hear the sister get louder, and at some point, I realized I'd put myself between the kid and the door without thinking. Security called the police. It didn't turn into anything you'd post about. The officer showed up with his hands open and a voice like grocery store music, took down a report, told us to keep the code word. The sister got herself worked up and then ran out of words and left. The kid stared at the floor and whispered that her tummy felt like bees. My girlfriend took her outside and sat on the curb and they counted cars by color until the bees turned into a nap. That night the tooth came out. It had been hanging by a thread of stubborn all week. The kid was in the tub making the kind of islands that only exist for 3 minutes before a wave of your own hand takes them out, and then she baked down rum on the washcloth and there it was in her palm like a piece of rice you could keep. She held it up like proof. We wrapped a quarter in foil because we don't own gold coins and she put it under her pillow with the seriousness of a banger. I snuck back in later with 2 more quarters because I don't know what the exchange rate is on a life that got moved around like that. My girlfriend wrote a note in swirly letters from the tooth fairy explaining the rate increase due to bravery. In the morning, the kid read it 3 times and said, "So the tooth fairy is a girl who reads," and my girlfriend said, "Obviously," and it felt like we'd snuck a win into a room that's been losing a long time. The caseworker came for the home study with a checklist on a clipboard and shoes that made no sound. She looked in our fridge and saw what anybody sees when Costco coupons and panic have a baby too much yogurt, not enough food that turns into dinner. She asked if the kid had nightmares and whether anyone in the family had a history of substance use or domestic violence. She didn't blink when the cat introduced himself by climbing directly into her tote bag. She took a picture of the niece's bed and another one of a locked cabinet where we now keep anything even remotely adult cleaners, wine glasses we never use, the marker that somehow smells like fruit. She asked us one more time if we understood no unsupervised contact with a mother. My girlfriend said yes. I said yes. The word felt like a door closing on a room where a child was sleeping on a coat. We had to sell a few of the figurines. I wouldn't have written that sentence a month ago because I would have been too busy defending why I didn't have to. Money is an argument you have with the future and the landlord at the same time. We pulled down 2 of the doubles and the one that always made my girlfriend laugh, even though it was chipped. I listed them with shaky hands and watched the bids stack up like strangers saying I'll take that from you. When we taped the boxes shut, the kid asked where the little people were going and my girlfriend told her they were off to new homes to be looked at and appreciated and not just sit in a closet, which is a kindness we don't always afford ourselves. I put the shipping labels on straight and told myself it was for fingerprints on a retainer we were going to pay and a bed that wasn't made of a pull-out couch metal bar. We met with our lawyer again, this time in a room that had a fake plant and a window that looked onto a wall. She told us the judge had extended kinship placement for 90 days with a review at 30. She said there would be a supervised visit and that we didn't have to go if we didn't want to be looked at through a 2-way mirror. My girlfriend stared at the edge of the table and said the kid deserved to see her mother even if it hurt, and I felt that sentence drop into me like a stone I'd have to learn to lift. We did the visit. The room had a basket of toys that looked like they'd been sighed on more than played with. Her sister came in with apology energy on her face and judgment energy in her shoulders, sat down, and asked the kid if she'd been having fun with the dykes, and I watched the caseworker write that exact sentence down. The kid showed her the lollipop wrapper that turned her tongue blue and told her about the password and the tooth fairy and the chocolate stars we were going to make this weekend, and the sister's mouth twitched and she said something about poison, and the caseworker slid a paper across the table like a dealer and said we were done for today. It wasn't dramatic. No one flipped a table. It still burned. At home, my girlfriend pulled a shoebox out of the back of her closet that had been tape shut for so long the tape had gone gray. Inside were envelopes with the kinds of letters I always pretend don't apply to me: final notice, past due, opportunity to resolve. She put them on the table between us and said, without crying, that she thought she could handle it alone because what if telling me meant I stopped thinking she was good at anything? I didn't have a speech. I just started dialing and asking to be put on payment plans and moved balances into smaller boxes so my head could stop being loud. She sat next to me and set alarms, and her phone for due dates, and the sound she chose was a little bell and not a siren. The kid crawled into my lap at some point and fell asleep like a warm apology. We made chocolates again even though the kitchen was already a list of things to clean. The kid banged the tray on the counter to get the bubbles out, with this little grunt of authority. We used the neighbor's thermometer and he stuck his head in our door just to say that if he heard the beeping in his sleep again he'd assume we were okay. We did star molds, and the flower ones, and poured a little too much in one so it looked like a comet instead. The apartment smelled like the soft kind of sweet that makes you wonder if you've been too harsh about everything. The kid wanted to bring some to her teacher and we said yes until we remembered the nut-free rule and the fact that there's a protocol for everything now down to sugar. We wrapped 3 in wax paper anyway and put them on a plate on top of the fridge next to a magnet shaped like a lemon because you can still give the people in your house small things without filing a form. The judge's order came through by email at 7:12 p.m. on a Friday while the cartoon credits were rolling and the kid was singing the wrong words on purpose. 90 days. A review. A plan for the sister that had words like treatment and compliance and supervision in it, and I'm not going to pretend those words didn't stack up on my chest. My girlfriend read the email twice and then a third time out loud like her voice could make it more real. She didn't make a decision alone. She slid the phone to me and said, "Okay. Together?" And I said yes because I've learned that's a word that turns into a bed and a code word and a lawyer's bill and a child picking strawberry socks in the middle of a Target aisle like she is all the time in the world. We didn't toast with anything. We didn't post a single picture. We sat on the floor with our backs to the kitchen cabinets because the chairs felt like too much formality for something that had taken our whole bodies to get to, and the kid came in with chocolate on her cheek and asked if we could make the stars again tomorrow, and we told her we could, even if the kitchen forgot how to be a kitchen in the meantime. Update 4. The first real fever hit on a Wednesday that thought it was Monday, the kind of heat you can feel before the thermometer even does its little digital chime. She went heavy in my arms, hotter at the temples than the forehead, eyes glassy in that way where you can tell her brain's doing math she doesn't want to show her work for. We did the usual lukewarm washcloth, the not spicy toothpaste ritual just to make her feel like routine still existed, the tiny sips of water from the purple cup she hates because purple tastes fake, which, honestly, respect. When the number blinked at 100 2, 8 and then 100 3. 1 in that unhelpful way electronics have, we threw on clothes with inside-out tags and socks that didn't match on purpose because that's the one thing you get to control. Urgent care at 10:24 p.m. is fluorescent and too clean and still has a sticky spot on the child-sized chair shaped like a turtle. The intake lady had the kind of voice that's nice right up until the exact syllable where it has to become policy. She needed proof we were allowed to make decisions. My girlfriend handed over the emergency order on her phone and the email from the caseworker with consent to treat in the subject line, and the lady said she would need it printed, which is a sentence that's never saved anyone's night. We stood there with a hot kid who had gone quiet in the kind of way that makes your own throat feel like a heel on your windpipe, and then my girlfriend said, very calmly, "I can call the caseworker right now," and she did, and the caseworker answered on the first ring like she'd been standing by a phone her whole life for that exact reason. And she told the intake lady that the email was enough and also that her agency had a fax machine and it worked. A fax machine. In the year we are currently living in. The nurse who took us back had daisies on her scrubs and a Star Wars tattoo peeking out from under her sleeve, and she put a popsicle stick to my niece's tongue and her whole face softened like the world remembered how to be kind. The grape Tylenol stained my hoodie like a bruise and my niece fell asleep curled into me, hot weight, damp hair. And if there is a religion in this life it might be the sound of a small person's breath evening out after a day that asked too much. They swabbed her nose for flu and COVID, which she did not enjoy, and then let her pick a sticker out of a basket that had exactly one option that wasn't a superhero. It was a fish with the weirdest smile I have ever seen. She loved it. We went home smelling like antiseptic and lollipop and sleep, and she woke up at 3:07 am. Just long enough to throw up on my pajama pants, and I didn't even flinch because everything important was already happening back inside of the dark, and we were just catching up to it. At school the next day her hair was still damp from the fever sweat rinse, and we were late enough to be noticed, which is its own currency in an elementary foyer. The secretary with the good binder said we could sign her in, and then asked if we'd heard about donuts with grown-ups on Friday, and I said the phrase out loud like a person learning a new animal. Apparently it's a thing now, sugar before math with whatever trusted adult you're willing to show off. We said yes because you don't learn new math by skipping it. The family tree assignment came home in the same stack as the book fair flyer that smells like ink and memories. A big blank tree with boxes for mother, father, grandparents, siblings, and this little side branch for pets, like the cat was ever going to be relegated to the margins in his own mind. My girlfriend put her finger on mother and didn't say anything, and then drew an extra box with her neat careful printing for aunties, and the kid looked at the new branch for a long time and said, "Can I have two?" Like she was asking for more strawberries and not more mothers. She wrote my girlfriend's name and then held the pencil over the other rectangle like it was going to shock her. "What do I call you?" she asked me like the world depended on the noun. I told her she could call me anything that felt like yes. She tried out Auntie and then Annie Stars, because obviously branding is important when you're in the candy business, and the pencil went down in the new box like we planted something that grows slow but for a long time. The first therapy intake happened in a room with bird decals on the window, the kind meant to trick small eyes into thinking sky lives on glass. The therapist has soft cardigan and shoes that made a whispery sound, and a shelf with those sand trays where worlds get made and destroyed in 30 minutes. My niece poured out the little blue stones like she was counting out weeks and put a small plastic house in the middle and then a dinosaur next to it with his mouth open, and the therapist didn't say interesting because she's good at her job. She just slid a little plastic person toward her and said, "Who's this?" And the kid said, "She's the one with the snacks." The therapist glanced at us and I pretended I hadn't been holding my breath for 6 days. They talked about bees and tummies and the loud voice you can hear through doors, and how when you bang a tray of chocolate on the counter sometimes gentle things come out. We signed papers that made me feel like I was scribbling down a promise in a language that actually counts. Our neighbor's teenager came over with a hex key and that look boys get where they are excited to be useful without anyone noticing. The bunk bed we found on Marketplace had 6,000 screws and an instruction booklet where the people were smiling too much for the amount of labor they were performing. He put it together with the concentration of a safecracker while my girlfriend read out loud and the cat supervised from the top of a box like a foreman. The kid chose the top bunk and I pretended my heart didn't crack a little at the thought of her wanting to be above the ground. We put one of those star projectors on the ceiling so there was a sky she could turn off. Later she fell asleep on the bottom bunk 2 steps into a story about a witch with mismatched socks, and I didn't say a thing because rest is rest even when it's not where you planned it. Her sister's mother, grandma, but not the kind with knitted blankets, more the kind with pressed slacks and eyes that have made a lot of judgments and called it love, showed up at supervised visitation without anyone inviting her, like the door to the past was a sliding one you could just breeze through. She wore a cross the size of a confession and brought a Tupperware of pound cake that she told the caseworker was from scratch, and I don't have the bandwidth for the genre of irony. The caseworker didn't blink. She said only approved parties could attend. The grandma did the thing older women do where they hold onto their purse like dignity, lives and leather, and said she had a right to see her granddaughter. The caseworker, who was a painting of patience, said she could apply to be added and that today, this was the room it was and these were the rules. The mother tried to grab the kid's hand and say, "Tell them you want to come home," and the kid looked at the carpet like she'd find the answer in the pattern and whispered that she missed her cat, which is an answer and also exactly right. I watched the grandma's face do 5 emotions in 12 seconds, none of which included listening. When we got home the email was already there saying the mother had violated the visitation terms by inviting third parties and the judge would be notified. We ate cold pasta over the sink like people whose dinners began and ended in transit. Donuts with grown-ups was outside under a strip of shade cloth that pretended it was a tree. My girlfriend balanced a paper plate in one hand and a tiny carton of milk in the other, and my niece introduced us to 3 separate adults as my aunties with a level of gravitas usually reserved for astronauts. Someone's dad said, "Is this legal?" under his breath to a cup of coffee like the steam could absorb cowardice. The principal wore a lanyard with 15 keys and the energy of a person who loves children for a living and is also not amused by nonsense. She saw our laminated emergency order and said, "We've got you," and meant the we in a way that made my eyes sting. On the way out, a bulletin board had a flyer for a kinship group that meets on Tuesdays in the cafeteria that smells permanently like tater tots. We went. It was a circle of tired people and a social worker with loose hair and a notepad who said things like "You're doing enough and we can help with a stipend," and the room exhaled in a way I didn't know rooms could. A woman with a baby on her lap passed me a pen and a list of acronyms, and none of it felt like pity. It felt like a map written by people who have actually been where you're going. The home study follow-up came with the same clipboard and a different sweater. Our fridge looked slightly more like meals and slightly less like a yogurt cult. The caseworker opened the cabinet where we keep cleaners and nodded at the new child lock like we'd learned a word in her language and pronounced it right. She asked the kid what the password was for school pickup, and my niece said strawberry socks with her whole chest, then giggled as if she just told a joke about international espionage. When the caseworker asked where she sleeps now, the kid took her by the hand. No one teaches them not to do that, they just haven't learned yet how the world makes you practice distance, and showed her the top bunk and then the bottom bunk and then declared the floor reading area with the authority of a small mayor. The caseworker wrote something down and I had this flash of wanting to read over her shoulder, like if I could see the words I could make them kinder with my eyeballs. My girlfriend squeezed my fingers so hard my ring turned into a lesson. Work has been its own circus. I went into HR with a folder that had tabs because adulthood is just arts and crafts with consequences, and told them I needed to adjust my hours. My boss, who wears ironic socks and the expression of a person who once read a management book and took notes, said we could pilot a flexible schedule for a month and then revisit, which is corporate for we hope you figure it out without us having to be brave. I nodded like compromise was the plan. My girlfriend picked up a morning shift at the diner so she can do school drop-off and still get us a discount on pancakes that taste like Sunday. We count tips at night the way other people count prayers, little piles of silver circles adding up to a giant wish for boring. Our lawyer called with the kind of voice you reserve for telling people there's both good and hard in the same sentence. The drug test came back on the mother with numbers that mean a thing we already knew in our bones. The judge extended the order another 30 and added a requirement that reads, like a scavenger hunt where all the items are your own bad habits. There was a note that the grandmother had filed to be considered for placement. That's a line you can feel even if you don't know the font. We met her in the hall at the community center by an accident, which is to say, life created the exact wrong moment with complete precision. She called my girlfriend by her childhood nickname in a tone that held a whole obituary for plenty of things not dead yet, and she told me she'd pray for me and then looked down at the cross like it had a screen she could refresh. I said thank you because I was raised to be polite even to hurricanes, and my girlfriend said, very clear, that if she wanted to see the child she could go through the caseworker like the rest of the human race. The grandma blinked like she'd lost her place in a book and we walked away with our backs doing that straight thing you do when you're trying not to shiver. That night we made chocolates, because what else do you do when people are trying to name your family for you? The neighbor let us borrow the thermometer again and shouted you break it you buy it through the door, like a sitcom dad. The kid banged the tray on the counter and yelled, bubbles out, like she was officiating a game. We did the star mold and the flowers in one weird silicone dinosaur that slumps if you look at it wrong. When we popped them out, one of the stars had a little tail where the chocolate had dripped and set before we wiped it, a comet again, and the kid said we should save that to one forecourt so they remember you can make mistakes and still be beautiful. I wanted to laugh and cry and eat the comet all at once. We put it on a plate and stuck it on top of the fridge next to the lemon magnet, and for a minute the kitchen remembered how to be a kitchen. The judge scheduled the 90-day review on a day when our car decided the check engine light was a lifestyle choice. The rideshare guy didn't show up again because the universe isn't that tidy, but the teenage neighbor did, with a socket wrench and the belief that YouTube plus enthusiasm equals a mechanic, and somehow the sound under the hood turned from sick to annoyed, which is sometimes all you can ask for. We got to the lawyer's office with 2 minutes to spare and the kid drew a family of stars on the back of the retainer agreement while my girlfriend spoke softly into the camera and told a stranger in a robe about toothbrush cups and strawberry socks, and that one time this week the bees in a small stomach were quiet for a whole morning. When the judge asked, again, if we understood no unsupervised contact, we both said yes like it was carved into the backs of our teeth. The email came through later with words like continue it and compliance and services, and my girlfriend read it out loud and then looked at me, really looked, and said, even if she gets better, we might still be here a long time, and I said, yes, and neither of us meant it as a threat or a promise. It was just a true thing we were going to live. After bedtime the cat knocked something off the kitchen counter because gravity is its job. It was a comet. It hit the floor and didn't break, which isn't a metaphor I feel comfortable using because it implies a mercy we don't always get, but I picked it up anyway and put it back on the plate like maybe this one time we could pretend the lesson was that sometimes, when you get lucky, a small sweet thing can fall and not shatter. My niece called from the bedroom, "Any stars? Can we make the bubbles go out again tomorrow?" And I told her we could, Even if the thermometer beeps in my sleep and the cord uses a font I hate and the fridge is an apology and the grandma files something with a name that makes my stomach jump. We can still bang a tray on a counter and watch air rise and disappear into a room that smells like sugar and soap and whatever else a home is made of when you're busy building it.